The Golden Cage of Vengeance. Elara Blackwood and Liam Thorne shared a love as deep as it was defiant, a beacon of hope in the gilded, restrictive world of high society. Elara, the sole heir to the once illustrious Blackwood textiles empire, found her family's legacy crumbling under years of mismanagement and market shifts. The only lifeline, her father insisted, was a strategic merger. Marriage to her ambitious and ruthless cousin, Marcus Valerius, who presided over a burgeoning industrial conglomerate. Driven by duty, Elara made the devastating decision to marry Marcus. Marcus, fearing any lingering threat, orchestrated a campaign to discredit Liam, framing him as a deceptive swindler who had preyed on Elara's family for his own gain. Liam's reputation was shattered, his career destroyed, and he was driven into exile, a disgraced pariah. Elara, heartbroken and trapped, carried the guilt of her choice and the ghost of Liam's memory. Years passed, transforming Liam Thorne. Driven by cold fury and an unyielding desire for justice, he meticulously rebuilt himself from nothing, amassing an unimaginable fortune as a shadowy figure. Meanwhile, the Valerius Empire flourished under Marcus and Elara's quiet support. The day came when Liam, now the ultimate power broker, re-entered their world. He subtly positioned himself as a vital investor in Valerius Ventures, offering deals too lucrative for Marcus to refuse, unknowingly forging chains around Marcus's neck. Then, with calculated precision, Liam revealed himself, not with a dramatic confrontation, but through undeniable truths. Marcus realized the very man he had framed was now the invisible hand, controlling his destiny. Liam's revenge was chillingly precise. He never sought to reclaim Elara, nor destroy the empire outright. Instead, he became the ultimate puppet master, dictating terms and holding the empire's lifeline. Marcus was forced to live in constant, gnawing fear, his entire edifice of power dependent on the man he wronged. Liam ensured Marcus would live in a gilded cage of his own making, outwardly successful, but internally terrified. Elara, trapped within her own silent prison, watched her husband's slow psychological unraveling, a witness to the profound and inescapable consequences of a love traded for approval. The shattered promise. The rain against the glass of the Blackwood Conservatory didn't sound like rain. It sounded like gravel being thrown against a coffin. I stood with my hands deep in my pockets, gripping the lining until my knuckles ached, staring out at the manicured gardens that were slowly drinking in the deluge. The grey light of the afternoon washed everything in a pallor that felt terminal. Behind me, the soft rustle of silk announced her movement before she even spoke. Liam. Her voice was a fractured thing, brittle and terrifyingly quiet. I turned. Elara stood by the entrance, framed by the dying blooms of her mother's prized orchids. She looked like a ghost of the woman I had laughed with only days ago. Her face was drawn, her skin the color of old parchment, and her eyes, usually a vibrant, defiant green, were dull, rimmed with the red evidence of sleepless nights. "Tell me it's a rumor," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, rough and scraping. "Tell me the announcement in the Gazette this morning was a mistake." Elara didn't step closer. She stayed anchored to the threshold, as if crossing the room would shatter whatever fragile resolve she was holding onto. She clasped her hands in front of her, and that was when I saw it. The ring. It was a vulgar, heavy thing, a square-cut diamond that caught the grey light and threw it back with a cold sneer. It belonged to the Valerius vault. I knew it instantly. "It wasn't a mistake," she whispered. The air left the room. For a moment, the only sound was the relentless drumming of the rain, and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a heartbeat counting down the seconds of my life as I knew it. In that silence, I understood something I had never allowed myself to see before. Love did not fail first. Power did. And without it, every promise we had made to each other was nothing more than a liability. "Marcus!" I spat the name, the taste of it like bile. "You're marrying Marcus Valerius, a man who sees people as assets and liabilities, a man who has spent the last 5 years trying to buy what your father built." "I am marrying a merger," she corrected, the words sounding rehearsed, as if she had repeated them until they stopped hurting. I am marrying the solvency of the Blackwood estate. I am marrying the safety of 300 employees who will be on the street if the mills close before the quarter ends. I closed the distance between us, ignoring the way she flinched. I stopped inches from her, close enough to smell the jasmine perfume she always wore, though now it was underpinned by the metallic scent of fear. We had a plan, Alara. My firm, we're growing. The new contract with the city, the architectural bids. I can help. It won't be instant, but we can turn the accounts around. We don't need his blood money. Dreams, Liam, she said, finally looking up at me, tears spilling over the dam of her lower lashes. You offer me beautiful dreams. Marcus offers a contract. He offers capital. Today. Now. And the cost? I demanded, grabbing her hands. Her fingers were ice cold. The cost is you. He doesn't want the mills, Alara. He wants to possess you. He wants to hang the Blackwood name on his wall like a trophy hunter. She pulled her hands away, a violent, jerking motion that severed the physical connection between us. It is done, Liam. The papers were signed this morning. My father, he can breathe again. The creditors have been called off. And us? I asked, the question hanging in the humid air between us. What about us? She looked away, staring at the condensation running down the window panes. There is no us anymore. There can't be. Marcus, he is a jealous man. He will not tolerate a shadow in his house. So I am a shadow now. You are a liability, a new voice boomed. The word landed exactly where it was meant to, not as an insult, but as a verdict. I spun around. Standing in the doorway, blocking the exit, was Marcus Valerius. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than my father had earned in a lifetime. He didn't look angry. He looked satisfied, like a cat that had just finished playing with a mouse and was ready to snap its neck. "Get out!" I snarled. Marcus stepped into the room, flanked by two men I didn't recognize. Burly, silent types in ill-fitting suits. "This is my fiancé's home, Thorn, which makes you the intruder. But I suppose you were used to taking liberties with things that do not belong to you." "I was just leaving," I said, looking back at Alara. She had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. "Alara, tell him." "She has nothing to say to you," Marcus said smoothly, walking past me to stand beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, possessively, his fingers digging into the silk of her dress. She didn't pull away. That inaction hurt more than the rejection. "In fact, I believe the police are the ones you'll be speaking to shortly." My brow furrowed. "Police? What are you talking about?" Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded sheaf of papers. He tossed them onto the wicker table between us. They fanned out. Bank statements, ledger copies, blueprints from my own office. "It was clever," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a theatrical baritone. He wasn't accusing me to convince the police. He was accusing me to convince Alara. The crime was only a tool. The real objective was belief, embedding yourself into the family confidence, gaining access to the renovation funds for the East Wing restoration, siphoning off 10% here, 15% there. It adds up, Liam, nearly $250,000. I stared at the papers, my vision blurring. "That's a lie. Those numbers. I never approved those transfers." "The signatures look authentic," Marcus shrugged. "And the funds were traced to an offshore account in your name, an account opened 6 months ago." "You forged it!" I shouted, taking a step toward him. The two guards stepped forward instantly, blocking my path. "You planted this. Alara, you know I would never touch a penny of your family's money. I've been working pro bono on the estate for 2 years." I looked at her, begging for her indignation, her defense. But Alara was staring at the papers on the table. She picked one up, her hand shaking violently. It was a transfer authorization, bearing a signature that looked identical to mine. "Liam," she whispered, looking at me with a horror that shattered my heart. This is the money for the workers' pension fund." "I didn't take it," I roared. the desperation clawing at my throat. "He's framing me, Alara. Can't you see? He needs to get rid of me, so he creates a crime." "The evidence is quite overwhelming," Marcus said, checking his watch. "The authorities are waiting at the front gate. I thought I'd give you the courtesy of a private exit for Alara's sake. If you leave now, leave the city, leave the country, perhaps the Blackwood family will decline to press charges, to avoid a scandal." "I'm not running," I said, grounding my feet. "I will fight this. I will prove you're a liar." Marcus smiled, a thin, reptilian curvature of his lips. "With what money, Liam? Your accounts were frozen an hour ago. Your partners at the firm have already voted to dissolve your equity to cover the potential fallout. You are toxic. You are destitute. And you are standing in the home of the woman you stole from." He leaned in close, his voice a whisper meant only for me. "She believes it, Liam. Look at her face. She chose survival. Now she sees you as the parasite I told her you were." I looked at Alara one last time. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at Marcus, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and dependence. She had traded her freedom for safety, and now he was ensuring she believed her sacrifice was moral, not just financial. If I was a villain, her marriage wasn't a tragedy. It was a rescue. "Alara," I said, my voice breaking. "Go," she whispered, her back to me. "Just go, Liam, before they arrest you." The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the quiet certainty in her voice, the sound of someone choosing safety and calling it morality. I looked at Marcus. "You haven't won." "I have the girl, the empire, and the future," Marcus replied dryly. "You have a suitcase and a head start. I'd say the scoreboard is clear." I turned and walked out into the rain. I didn't take a coat. I let the freezing downpour soak through my shirt, numbing the skin, trying to freeze the fire of humiliation that burned in my chest. The days that followed were a blur of dismantling a life. Marcus had been thorough. My apartment was raided, my laptop seized. The headline in the City Chronicle screamed, "Architectural prodigy accused of defrauding Blackwood estate." Friends I had known since university stopped answering my calls. My mentor at the firm handed me a box of my personal effects in the lobby, refusing to even look me in the eye as he told me I was banned from the premises. I was a pariah, a swindler, a gold digger who had preyed on a vulnerable heiress. The narrative was perfect, airtight, and devastating. I stood on the platform of the central station 3 nights later. I had sold my watch, a gift from my father, to buy a ticket to the coast. From there, a steamer to the continent. I had nothing left. No name, no honor, no love. The whistle of the train shrieked, a lonely, mournful sound that echoed off the iron girders of the station roof. I boarded the third-class carriage, sliding into a hard wooden seat near the window. As the train lurched forward, gaining speed, the city began to slide past. The glittering lights of the skyline, the towers of commerce where I had once thought I would build a legacy, all faded into the distance. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. The sorrow that had overwhelmed me in the conservatory had hardened into something else. It was sitting in the pit of my stomach, heavy and cold as lead. Alara had made her choice. She had chosen the gilded cage. She had let Marcus paint me as a monster to justify her own surrender. I closed my eyes, and I could still see the diamond on her finger, the symbol of my destruction. Liam Thorne, the promising architect, ended in the Blackwood Conservatory. What sat on that train was something quieter, something patient. A man who understood that survival was no longer enough. Marcus Valerius had taken everything from me. He thought he had buried me, but he had made a fatal error. He had left me alive. And as the rhythm of the train wheels clicked against the track, clack, 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 it sounded less like a departure and more like a promise. A promise not of love, but of a reckoning. I watched my reflection in the darkened window, a hollow-eyed stranger, and waited for the anger to consume the grief. It was the only fuel I had left. The rain in Macau tasted different than the rain in London. In England, the downpour was a melancholy drape, a soft grey curtain that invited introspection. Here, it was violent and warm, smelling of ozone, diesel, and the briny rot of the South China Sea. It battered the tin roof of the cramped boarding house I now called home, a relentless drumming that matched the pounding headache behind my eyes. I stared at the peeling wallpaper, yellowed by decades of cigarette smoke. My reflection in the cracked mirror over the basin was a stranger's face, the Liam Thorne who had laughed at garden parties, who had believed that love could conquer balance sheets, was dead. He had died the moment the plane wheels lifted off the tarmac at Heathrow, leaving behind a reputation shredded by lies and a heart hollowed out by betrayal. What remained was a vessel, empty and aching, waiting to be filled with something new. For the first 6 months, that vessel was filled with self-pity and cheap whiskey. I worked odd jobs, unloading crates at the docks, translating documents for petty bureaucrats, anything that didn't require a background check. I was a ghost, haunting the edges of a neon-soaked purgatory. But grief, I learned, is a finite fuel. It burns hot and fast, eventually leaving only ash. It was on a humid Tuesday, sweating through a cheap shirt in a crowded noodle shop, that the ash hardened into something else. I saw a newspaper left on a neighbouring table, the financial section. A small blurb about Valerius Industries acquiring a textile supplier in Manchester. My family's supplier. Marcus was cannibalizing the very history Alara had sacrificed herself to save. Something snapped. It wasn't a break. It was a setting of the bone. The sorrow evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I didn't want to mourn my life anymore. I wanted to own the world that had destroyed it. I began to study. I didn't have capital, but I had a mind that Marcus had always underestimated. I spent my nights in 24-hour internet cafes, the blue light bathing my tired face as I devoured global market trends, derivatives, and the chaotic, unregulated frontiers of cryptocurrency and distressed assets. I learned that in the shadowy corners of global finance, reputation didn't matter, only yield did. My entry point came through a man named Silas Vane, a disgraced ex-banker from New York, who ran a private equity firm out of a glass tower in Singapore that operated more like a pirate ship. I had nothing to offer him but a strategy I had formulated over 3 sleepless nights, a way to short-sell a failing mining conglomerate that everyone else was betting on. I managed to talk my way into his office, wearing a suit I had pressed under a mattress. Silas sat behind a desk that looked like a slab of obsidian, nursing a glass of water, his eyes reptilian and unblinking. "Mr. Thorne," Silas said, his voice a dry rasp. "My secretary tells me you refused to leave until I heard you out. You have 3 minutes. If you bore me, security will break your arm on the way out." "You're holding heavy positions in Cobalt Dynamics," I said, skipping the pleasantries. I didn't sit. I stood tall, my hands clasped behind my back to hide the tremor of adrenaline. "You think the government subsidy is going to come through next month?" Silas raised an eyebrow, the first crack in his boredom. "It's a guaranteed contract. Insider information." "It's a trap," I countered, my voice steady. "The subsidy is a smokescreen. I've tracked the geopolitical shifts in the region. The warlord controlling the mines is about to be ousted by a faction funded by Beijing. The moment that happens, the contracts are void. The stock goes to zero. But..." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air-conditioned room. "If you reverse your position now and leverage the panic that follows, you don't just avoid a loss, you make 40%. Silas leaned forward, the leather of his chair creaking. "And how does a man with fraying cuffs and mud on his shoes know more about Central African politics than my entire analytics department?" "Because your department looks at spreadsheets," I said, tapping my temple. "I look at desperation. I know what it looks like when power is about to shift." He stared at me for a long time. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire. Then, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. 40%, he murmured. If you're wrong, Thorn, I will ensure you never work in this hemisphere again. If you're right, I'll give you 5% of the take. 10, I said instantly. Silas laughed, a sharp bark of a sound. 7, and a desk. Done. 2 weeks later, the coup happened exactly as I predicted. Cobalt Dynamics collapsed. Silas Vane made $60 million in a single afternoon. I walked away with $4 million and a permanent position at his right hand. That was the seed. Over the next 5 years, I watered that seed with blood and sleepless nights. I moved from Singapore to Dubai, then to Zurich, shedding my identity with every time zone. I stopped being Liam Thorne. I became a shell company. I became an algorithm. I specialized in the acquisition of distressed entities, companies that, like me, had been hollowed out and left for dead. I bought them, stripped them, rebuilt them, or sold them for parts. I learned the language of leverage. I learned that money is not currency. It is a weapon. It is the ability to walk into a room and change the temperature without speaking. One evening in Zurich, 3 years into my exile, I found myself sitting across from a Swiss manufacturing mogul named Dieter Kress. He was a man much like Marcus, arrogant, born into wealth, convinced of his own invincibility. He needed a liquidity injection to save his family's watchmaking empire, and I was the only lender willing to touch his toxic debt. We were dining in a private chalet overlooking the frozen lake, the fire crackling in the hearth. The air smelled of pine and expensive truffles. "You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Thorne," Kress said, swirling his Pinot Noir. He looked tired, the skin beneath his eyes sagging. "The interest rates you propose, they are usurious. You are strangling me." I cut into my steak, the knife slicing through the meat with satisfying ease. "I am not strangling you, Herr Kress. I am merely pricing the risk of your incompetence." Kress flushed, his grip tightening on the stem of his glass. "Incompetence? My family has run this company for a century." "And you have run it into the ground in a decade," I replied, not looking up from my plate. "You ignored the smartwatch revolution. You over-leveraged on real estate. You treated the company coffers as your personal piggy bank. Now you want mercy." I finally looked him in the eye. "Mercy is a luxury you cannot afford." "There are other investors," Kress blustered, though his eyes betrayed his panic. "There are none," I said softly. "I bought your outstanding debt from the bank this morning. I own the notes. If you don't sign this deal, I will foreclose on your factories tomorrow. I will sell your brand to the highest bidder, and I will personally see to it that your chalets, your cars, and this very dinner are liquidated to pay your creditors." Kress stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He was looking for the monster, the shouting tyrant, but I wasn't shouting. I was perfectly calm. This was the difference between the man I had been and the man I was now. The old Liam would have felt pity for this drowning man. The new Liam saw only a variable in an equation. "Why?" Kress whispered. "You don't need the money. Why do this?" I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin and placed it gently on the table. "Because I can. And because the world is divided into those who dictate terms and those who accept them, I am finished with accepting them." He signed. Of course he signed. They always did when they realized the cage was already locked. As my fortune grew, doubling, then tripling into the billions, my life became a study in asceticism. I bought a penthouse in Tokyo, a villa in Como, but they remained empty, sterile museums of success. I didn't date. I didn't socialize. Every interaction was transactional. I hired private investigators, not to track business rivals, but to watch them. I received monthly dossiers on the Valerius Empire. I watched from afar as Marcus expanded, fueled by the merger that had cost me everything. I saw photos of Alara at galas, her smile tight, her eyes shadowed. She looked like a porcelain doll kept in a velvet box, beautiful, pristine, and utterly lifeless. Those photos were my torture and my motivation. I pinned them to the corkboard of my mind. Every time I felt a flicker of fatigue, every time my conscience pricked at the ruthless destruction of a competitor, I thought of Ilara's face the day she told me she was marrying him. I thought of the smirk on Marcus's lips when the police dragged me away. I wasn't building a fortune. I was building an anvil. By the 5th year, I had obscured my ownership of my conglomerate behind a labyrinth of shell companies. Tenebris Holdings. To the world, Tenebris was a faceless giant of venture capital, a shadowy entity that moved markets with a whisper. To me, it was the sword I would swing. I remember the night the transformation was complete. I was in New York, standing on the balcony of a penthouse that scraped the belly of the clouds. The city sprawled below me, a grid of electricity and ambition. The wind whipped at my coat, biting and cold, but I didn't shiver. My phone buzzed. It was my chief analyst, a brilliant, terrifying young woman named Sarah. "It's done, Liam," she said, her voice tinny against the wind. "We've acquired the controlling stake in the lithium supply chain Marcus needs for his new battery division. He doesn't know it's us. He thinks it's a Dutch consortium." "And the shipping lines?" I asked, looking out at the Hudson River. "Secured. We effectively control the logistics for his entire European expansion. If we close the tap, he starves in a month." I closed my eyes, letting the sensation wash over me. It wasn't joy. It was the heavy, solid thud of a vault door closing. I held the keys. Marcus Valerius, the man who believed he was a king, was now living in a house built on land that I owned. He just didn't know it yet. "Good," I said. "Don't squeeze him yet. Let him grow. Let him feel successful. Let him extend himself until he is so leveraged that he cannot breathe without our permission." "And then?" Sarah asked. "Then," I said, opening my eyes to the glittering indifference of the city. I introduced myself. I hung up and walked back inside the glass box of my apartment. I poured a glass of water. I had stopped drinking alcohol years ago. It dulled the edge, and stood before the floor-to-ceiling window. The reflection that stared back was hard, polished, and terrifyingly calm. The boy who had loved poetry and picnics was gone, eroded by the harsh winds of the world. In his place stood a titan forged in fury, a man who had turned his heart into a vault and thrown away the combination. I was ready. The exile was over. It was time to go home, not as a beggar, but as a god of their own making. The silent partner. The silk tie around my neck felt less like an accessory and more like a garrote, though I was not the one destined to choke. I adjusted the cuffs of my bespoke charcoal suit, the fabric cool and smooth against my skin, a tactile reminder of the armor I had forged over the last decade. The elevator ascended with a silent, frictionless glide, counting off the floors of the Valerius Tower, a glass needle piercing the smog-choked London sky. This was the belly of the beast, the inner sanctum of the man who had stolen my life, and I was entering it not as a beggar, but as a king who had learned the value of invisibility. The doors parted with a soft chime, revealing a sprawling ballroom drenched in amber light and the low murmur of the elite. The air was thick with expensive gin, roasted duck, and the metallic tang of ambition barely disguised as confidence. I stepped out, my polished Oxfords making no sound on the plush carpet. To the guests swirling past with champagne flutes and rehearsed laughter, I was no one, just another financier among many, a shadow wearing an expensive face. They knew Ethelgard Holdings. They did not know me. I claimed a position near the periphery, beside a floor-to-ceiling window that framed the city's glittering sprawl like a prize on display. My reflection in the glass startled me. The boy who had fled into the rain with nothing but shame was gone. The man staring back had eyes like chipped flint, sharpened by patience and sustained by something colder than rage. "The shark enters the water," a voice murmured beside me. I didn't turn. Arthur Sterling never wasted words. He was immaculate as always. Tailored suit, neutral expression, the perfect proxy. "Is he here?" I asked. He is, Sterling replied calmly. By the orchestra, pretending to enjoy Mozart. He's nervous, Liam. Valerius Industries needs liquidity by the end of the quarter. If he doesn't secure it tonight, the stock collapses. He's bleeding. We are the tourniquet, I said. Sterling nodded once. But a tourniquet applied too tightly doesn't save the limb, I continued quietly. It kills it. And then I saw him. Marcus Valerius stood beneath a crystal chandelier, laughing too loudly at something a senator whispered. The arrogance remained, but it was brittle now, stretched thin over fear. His suit was perfect. His posture was not. He stood like a man bracing for an impact he could sense but not locate. Go, I said. Present the final terms. Make sure he understands the liquidity comes with oversight. Athelgard takes a board seat, veto power on acquisitions, and the Blackwood Textile Division as collateral. Sterling hesitated. The mills haven't been profitable in years. Why anchor the deal there? Because it is the only thing she has left. I did not say it. Sentimentality, I replied instead, swirling the ice in my glass, is the most reliable leverage in existence. Marcus keeps the mills to justify his marriage. If he sacrifices them to save himself, he drives the wedge deeper. Do it. Sterling moved through the room with practiced ease. I stayed where I was, watching the geometry of the trap assemble itself. Marcus turned as Sterling approached. Recognition flashed, then relief. The kind men feel when they believe salvation has arrived disguised as opportunity. Mr. Sterling, Marcus boomed, extending a hand. I trust the evening meets your standards. The wine is excellent, Sterling replied smoothly. But my principal prefers efficiency. The liquidity window closes at midnight. Marcus's smile tightened. Your principal, the mind behind Ethelgard, is he here? He prefers observation, Sterling said. We have the papers. 200 million. Effective immediately. In exchange, controlling interest in logistics, audit rights, and the collateralization of the Blackwood assets. Marcus's gaze flicked across the room. I followed it. Ilara. She stood near a marble pillar, wrapped in a midnight blue gown that drank in the light. She was breathtaking and impossibly distant. Beautiful in the way sealed vaults are beautiful. She wasn't engaging anyone. She was watching Marcus, not with love, not with anger, with the quiet exhaustion of someone who had learned the cost of endurance. Marcus swallowed. The mills, he said softly. They've been in her family for generations. And under your stewardship, Sterling replied evenly. They are 2 quarters from collapse. Ethelgard absorbs the debt, or you explain the loss to your shareholders. I took a drink, the whiskey burning on the way down. Sign it, I thought. Show me who you are. Marcus looked at Ilara again. She did not meet his eyes. She was staring into nothing, into a life already narrowed by compromise. His shoulders sagged. Where do I sign? The triumph tasted like ash. I had imagined this moment sustaining me. Instead, it hollowed me out. This was not victory. This was inevitability. Sterling produced the pen. Marcus signed. Each stroke tightened the leash. Audit rights, vendor approvals, cash flow control. He handed me his empire, believing he had secured his freedom. Sterling shook his hand. A wise decision. Please thank your principal, Marcus said, relief flooding his features. Tell him he's made a friend. I turned away. As I reached the doors, a sensation prickled my spine. I looked back. Ilara had turned. Her eyes found mine across the room. For a heartbeat, the years collapsed. I saw the girl who smelled of rain and old books. I saw the woman trapped behind glass and silk. She took a step forward, confusion flickering across her face, as if some buried truth had stirred. I understood then. This cage did not belong to Marcus alone, and I closed the door anyway. In the corridor, Sterling caught up to me, exhilarated. It's done. We own his debt. The Blackwood lien is secured. He thinks money is freedom, I said. He'll learn, Sterling replied. When do we reveal? Soon, I said. Let him celebrate. The elevator doors closed, sealing us inside the mirrored capsule. I watched my reflection, calm, precise, unrecognizable. Monday, I would show Marcus Valerius the cost of survival. And somewhere above, in a room full of light and lies, Elara remained where I had left her, safe, preserved, and trapped inside the golden cage I had just locked from the outside. The unveiling. The air inside the private executive suite of the Meridian Club carried the unmistakable perfume of old money, a deliberate, curated blend of cured tobacco embedded deep into the leather armchairs, beeswax polish rubbed lovingly into antique wood, and beneath it all, the faint metallic tang of ozone drifting in through the sealed windows from the thunderstorm coiling above the city. This was the scent of institutions that had never feared extinction, only inconvenience. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, one hand resting loosely against the glass, watching rain lash against it with disciplined violence. Each drop struck, flattened, and slid downward, distorting the London skyline into a bleeding watercolor of greys, silvers, and electric blues. Towers of glass and steel warped and bent, their reflections dissolving into something abstract and unrecognizable. Fitting, my reflection hovered faintly in the pane, superimposed over the city I now owned in ways its architects would never understand. A man in a bespoke charcoal suit stared back at me, cut sharp enough to command attention without ever demanding it. The tailoring was flawless, but it was no longer armor. Armor implied defense. This was simply skin, natural, unremarkable, lethal. The boy who once believed in proximity, in loyalty, in the idea that love could outweigh leverage, had died quietly years ago. What remained was something colder, something efficient. I lifted the glass of 20-year-old scotch to my lips and took a measured sip. The alcohol burned just enough to ground me, to remind me that this moment was real, tangible, irreversible. This was not fantasy. This was the pivot, the silent hinge upon which an entire decade of patience turned. For years, I had been the invisible mechanism behind the Valerius Empire, the nameless capital flowing into its veins, the quiet approvals, the delayed collapses, the perfectly timed rescues. Every reprieve Marcus Valerius believed he had earned through brilliance or instinct had been granted by my discretion. He thought himself powerful because the world still bowed. He never asked why. The heavy mahogany doors behind me creaked open. I did not turn. "Mr. Sterling," a voice boomed, familiar yet roughened by time and stress, the forced ease of a man accustomed to purchasing solutions, now increasingly unsure whether he could still afford them. My apologies for the delay. Traffic on the bridge was absolute murder. Marcus Valerius. Even the sound of his footsteps on the Persian rug carried entitlement. Each step was heavy, declarative, a claim staked on space itself. Marcus moved through rooms as if ownership were a natural law, as if walls and ceilings existed for his convenience. "Time," I said calmly, my gaze still fixed on the rain-blurred city, "is a relative luxury, Marcus." I let the silence stretch, thin and deliberate. "Though I understand yours is running short." There it was, the pause, subtle, involuntary, a microfracture in expectation. Marcus Valerius was not accustomed to being addressed by his first name by anyone he had not personally elevated, certainly not by a benefactor he believed subordinate, nameless, controllable. "Direct," he said finally, forcing a chuckle that arrived a fraction too late to sound natural. Crystal clinked as he poured himself a drink without asking. "I like that. The market's been volatile, but the partnership with Archon Global offers stability. Phase 2 can still be salvaged." I turned slowly. The lighting in the suite was unkind, and I had chosen it that way. Shadows pooled in the wrong places. The brass banker's lamp on the central desk threw harsh angles across his face, revealing what the society pages softened. Deep lines carved by stress, a hairline retreating in quiet surrender, a confidence maintained through effort rather than instinct. His suit was immaculate, but it wore him now. Aggressive terms, Marcus continued, watching my face carefully, reading for tells. But business is war, is it not? We agree on that, I said, stepping fully into the light. In war, men lie. His smile tightened. Smile. They manipulate terrain, I continued. They sacrifice expendable pieces. They frame innocent men. They corrupt systems. They marry women they do not love to gain leverage over legacies they do not understand. The transformation was immediate. Color drained from his face with astonishing speed, bravado collapsing under the weight of recognition. Biological shock overrode social conditioning. His mouth opened, closed, his pupils dilated, searching my face not for confirmation, but for denial. "Hello, Marcus," I said softly. He staggered back a step, his hip colliding with the side table. The decanter rattled violently. "Liam?" The name came out wrong, thin, disbelieving. "Thorn? It's been a long time," I replied. I pulled out the chair opposite him and sat with deliberate patience, folding my hands loosely on the table. I gestured to the seat across from me. "Sit down," I said. "This conversation benefits neither of us if you remain standing." "This is impossible," he stammered. "You were ruined. You disappeared." "I was exiled," I corrected calmly. "By you." I leaned back slightly. "And I was ruined, yes. But ruin is an extraordinarily stable foundation if you know how to build on it." I tapped the thick leather folder resting on the desk. "Unlike inherited kingdoms," I added, "which tend to collapse once their owners start removing stones from the base." Understanding hit him like a delayed concussion. "Archon Global," he breathed. "The liquidity injections, the debt restructuring, the emergency credit lines. All me," I said. "Every dollar that kept Valerius Industries breathing over the last 18 months came from my accounts." I leaned forward, just enough. "I am the floor beneath your feet, Marcus, and the ceiling pressing down on your head." Anger surged briefly, instinctive and misplaced. He leaned toward me, palms slamming onto the desk. "This is extortion." "You lack the leverage to define it that way," I replied evenly. "The banks won't return your calls. I know. I purchased your debt 6 months ago." I opened the folder. "If you walk out of this room without signing," I continued, "I call in the loans tomorrow morning. Valerius Industries dissolves by noon." His breathing grew shallow. "And Alara's inheritance," I added gently, "disappears with it." That was the blow. His knees buckled. He collapsed into the chair, suddenly smaller, gravity seeming to increase around him. "What do you want?" he whispered. "Her? You want her back?" I studied him for a long moment. "No," I said. "This is not about reclaiming anything." I reached into my jacket and slid the smaller envelope across the desk. "This," I continued, "is about permanence." He hesitated before opening it. His hands shook as the contents emerged. The affidavit, the photograph. "The accountant you paid 10 years ago," I said evenly. "And the meeting 3 weeks ago when you tried to buy his silence." Marcus dropped the papers as if they burned. "You're going to the police," he whispered. "No," I said. "Prison ends things too cleanly. Martyrs are remembered." I leaned in, locking eyes with him. "I don't want you remembered." I tapped the contract. "You keep the title, the house, the cars, the illusion." "And behind it?" he asked. "Nothing moves without me." His voice broke. "You're turning my life into a cage." "No," I corrected quietly. "I'm leaving you exactly where you placed yourself." He picked up the pen. The scratch of ink sounded final. "You're a monster," he muttered. "I'm what survives," I replied. I stood, collecting the folder. The unveiling was complete. Marcus Valerius now understood the dimensions of his cage, and I had never felt further from freedom. The air in the boardroom of the Valerius Tower was always kept at a precise 68 degrees, A sterile, artificial chill engineered to keep minds sharp and tempers obedient. Today, however, it felt less like a climate-controlled environment and more like a mausoleum. The cold did not refresh, it preserved. It froze decay in place. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, the leather of the chair cool against my spine, watching a single drop of sweat trace a slow, humiliating path down Marcus's temple. It clung to his skin for a moment, defiant, before surrendering to gravity. Marcus stood near the projection screen, his hand gripping the clicker with such force that his knuckles had faded to the color of old parchment. He was halfway through a presentation on the acquisition of a shipping line in the volatile markets of Southeast Asia, a venture he had championed for months, a legacy project, a monument to ambition disguised as strategy. The logistical synergy is undeniable, Marcus said, his voice betraying him on the final syllable. He cleared his throat, the sound jagged and intrusive in the silence. His eyes flicked nervously toward the board, a gallery of grey suits and cautious faces, before inevitably drifting to me. With the capital injection from the Thorn Group, he continued, forcing steadiness, we can bypass the remaining regulatory hurdles and dominate the trade route by Q3. The room did not respond. No pens moved, no chairs shifted, no murmurs of approval rose to meet him. They were all looking at me now. They did not know the history, the conservatory, the forged ledgers, the exile. But they understood gravity. They understood that without my consent, the Valerius Empire was not an empire at all, merely an elegant structure hollowed out by debt. I allowed the silence to expand. I let it thicken until it became a physical presence, pressing against lungs, tightening throats. Then I reached for my fountain pen, unscrewed the cap with deliberate care, and set it on the table. The click echoed sharply, final, terminal. No, I said softly. Marcus flinched. It was not subtle. His shoulders jerked as if struck, his body reacting before his pride could intervene. Mr. Thorn, Liam, if you look at the projections on slide 14, I have reviewed the projections, I interrupted calmly. There was no anger in my voice, no satisfaction, only arithmetic. They are optimistic. The strategy is coherent. The margins are attractive. Hope sparked in his eyes. Then why? He demanded, control finally cracking. Why veto it? I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. Because I prefer the company to focus on domestic manufacturing. Confusion rippled through the room. It is less glamorous, I continued. Lower returns, slower growth. But it keeps capital close. It keeps leadership visible. It keeps you here, Marcus. I let the final word land, grounded. The realization struck him with brutal clarity. Profit was no longer the metric. Expansion was no longer the goal. The board was not watching for success. They were watching for compliance. We will vote, I said evenly. All in favor of Mr. Valerius's acquisition. Silence. All opposed. Hands rose, one after another, efficient, unemotional. Marcus's remained frozen at his side. Meeting adjourned, as the board members filed out, avoiding eye contact, murmuring excuses. Marcus collapsed into the nearest chair. The golden boy of industry appeared suddenly, irreversibly human. I stayed where I was. This was the texture of my revenge. Not collapse, but erosion. The doors opened again. Elara entered. She had aged, though not as Marcus had. Where he had frayed, she had hardened. Brittle, like porcelain fired too long in heat it never chose. She carried a silver tray bearing a decanter and glasses, a ritual, familiar and rehearsed. She stopped when she saw the room emptied of witnesses. I thought the meeting would run longer, she said quietly. It was decisive, I replied, standing. Your husband made a proposal. It was rejected. Marcus looked up, eyes red. He's strangling us, Elara. I am stabilizing the company, I said calmly, walking toward the window. Unchecked ambition is dangerous. You don't care about stability, Marcus snapped, rising again. You want to punish me. You could end this. Why don't you? I turned back slowly. End it? I asked. And free you. I stepped closer. If I destroy you, Marcus, you become a victim. If I fire you, you escape the weight of what you built. I stopped inches away. But this, I gestured around the room. This is permanence. Ilara's fingers tightened around the tray. You made a choice, I said, finally meeting her gaze. You chose safety. I'm honoring that choice. This isn't justice, she whispered. It's cruelty. No, I said quietly. It's memory. Marcus sank back into his chair, broken not in wealth, but in spirit. I checked my watch. I expect the report Monday, I said, already turning away. What do you want from us? Marcus asked hoarsely. I paused at the door. It ends when I say it ends. The elevator doors closed. Behind me, the cage remained intact. The weight of gold. The silence of the penthouse was not peaceful. It was curated. Ilara stood alone in the master bedroom of the Valerius estate, barefoot on imported Carrara marble that never quite warmed beneath her skin. The city beyond the windows shimmered, London in its evening splendor, alive with motion, desire, consequence. From this height, it looked unreal, like a model city built for someone else's amusement. She touched the glass lightly, as if the barrier might dissolve under enough pressure. It didn't. Behind her, the door opened. Marcus entered without knocking. He moved differently now, slower, cautious. The man who once filled rooms with certainty now seemed to shrink within them, like a figure painted too small for the canvas. His tie was loosened, his jacket discarded somewhere between the elevator and the bedroom. His hair, once meticulously groomed, had begun to betray him, silver threading through black, evidence of a decay that money could not arrest. It happened again, he said. Ilara did not turn. The shipping acquisition, he continued, blocked, unanimously. She closed her eyes. I warned you, she said quietly. You said he wouldn't dare. Marcus laughed, a sharp, broken sound. I underestimated him. That had become a pattern. He crossed the room and poured himself a drink without asking. The decanter was crystal, the whiskey older than their marriage. He drank too much, too fast. He enjoys it, Marcus said suddenly. You know that, don't you? He enjoys watching me beg. Ilara finally turned. No, she said. He enjoys watching you pretend you're still in control. The words surprised her as much as they wounded him. Marcus stiffened. You're defending him now. I'm naming reality. Marcus slammed the glass onto the dresser. He's doing this because of you. That landed. Ilara inhaled slowly. Don't, she warned. He loved you, Marcus pressed. He still does. That's why he won't destroy us outright. He wants us to rot. Ilara felt something twist inside her. Not pain exactly, but recognition. No, she said again, more firmly. If this were about love, he would have ended it. Love seeks closure. This is something else. Marcus scoffed. You think you know him? I think I finally see him, and that frightened her more than Marcus ever had. That night, sleep refused her. Ilara lay awake beside her husband, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, uneven, restless. Every sound in the penthouse seemed amplified. The hum of climate control, the distant siren below, the subtle ticking of a clock she didn't remember choosing. She stared at the ceiling and thought of the conservatory, the rain, the ring. The moment she had told herself there was no other way. She had repeated that phrase for 10 years. No other way. It had become a spell, a shield against the slow corrosion of her conscience, until Liam returned, until the lie collapsed. Because there had been another way. It would have been harder, messier, uncertain, but it would have been hers. Ilara rolled onto her side, facing away from Marcus. For the first time, she allowed herself to think the forbidden thought. Not what Liam had become, but what she had helped create. The next morning, Elara did something she had not done in years. She went to the Blackwood Mills, the original ones, not the sleek, rebranded facilities featured in annual reports, but the aging brick complex on the outskirts of the city, the place her grandfather had built with calloused hands and stubborn pride. The place Marcus had insisted was sentimentally inefficient. Her driver looked surprised but said nothing. When she stepped out of the car, the air smelled of oil, dust, and old fabric. The building loomed, weathered, scarred, but standing. Workers moved through the gates, lunch pails in hand. They glanced at her, curious but not reverent. That stung more than she expected. Inside, the floor manager, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Valerius," she said carefully. "We weren't told to expect you." "I didn't announce myself," Elara replied. "I wanted to see it as it is." The woman hesitated, then nodded. "This way." As they walked, Elara noticed the details she had once ignored. Patched machinery, improvised solutions, people doing more with less. These weren't inefficiencies, they were endurance. "This place hasn't turned a profit in years," Elara said softly. "No," the manager agreed, "but it's kept 600 families fed." Elara stopped walking. 600. The number settled heavily on her chest. "This division was nearly used as collateral," she said. The woman's jaw tightened. "We heard." Elara swallowed. "Who stopped it?" The manager hesitated only a second. "Mr. Thorne." The name landed like a dropped plate. "He didn't just block it," the woman continued. "He ordered an audit, found cost skimming, redirected funds, increased safety budgets. He hasn't visited, but he watches." Elara felt dizzy. "He saved it," she whispered. "Yes," the woman said simply. "He did." Elara pressed her palm to one of the old looms, feeling its vibration, its life. For the first time, she understood the cruelty of Liam's revenge. It wasn't destruction, it was correction. He was rebuilding what she had abandoned, while making sure she knew she had not been necessary to its survival. That evening, Elara stood once more before the glass walls of the penthouse. The city glowed. Behind her, Marcus raged into a phone, arguing with lawyers, blaming markets, demanding loyalty that no longer existed. She tuned him out. Instead, she imagined Liam somewhere else, alone perhaps, in an office, high above another skyline. A man who had traded love for leverage and discovered neither brought peace. They were mirrors now, two people shaped by the same wound, choosing different weapons. And suddenly, with terrifying clarity, Elara understood. The cage was not built for Marcus. It was built for her. She had chosen safety over truth, and now truth had returned, with interest. Elara closed her eyes. The gold around her glittered, and for the first time, it felt unbearably heavy. Terms of truth. Elara did not announce herself. She learned long ago that power moved more freely when it wasn't preceded by permission. The elevator carried her upward in silence, glass walls revealing the London skyline unraveling beneath her feet. The building, Phoenix Tower now, no longer Valerius, was colder than the penthouse she had left behind. Not in temperature, but in intent. This was a place built for decisions, not comfort. When the doors opened, the receptionist barely looked up. "Ms. Blackwood," she said evenly, "not Mrs. Valerius." That omission landed harder than any insult. "Mr. Thorne is expecting you." Of course he was. Elara walked down the corridor alone. The walls were minimalist. Steel, glass, controlled light. No art, no warmth. A place where nothing distracted from outcome. The door at the end stood ajar. She entered without knocking. Liam Thorne stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring down at the city like a general surveying occupied territory. He did not turn when she entered. "You're late," he said. "I didn't schedule an appointment." "No," he replied calmly. "But you've been circling this conversation for years." She closed the door behind her. Silence stretched. Not awkward, not tentative. It was deliberate. Two people accustomed to rooms bending to their presence, now occupying the same space without yielding. He turned at last. There was no flicker of surprise on his face, no triumph, no softness, only recognition. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "And yet," Ilara replied, "you made sure I could be." A corner of his mouth tightened, not a smile. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. She didn't. "I'm not here to negotiate," she said, "and I'm not here to plead." "Good," Liam said. "Those are inefficient positions." She stepped closer. "I went to the mills." That did it, not visibly. Liam didn't flinch, didn't inhale sharply, but something behind his eyes shifted, microscopically. "You had no authority to be there," he said. "I didn't need it." "You rarely did," he replied coolly. She stopped 2 paces from his desk. "You saved them," she said. "You saved what I failed to protect." He studied her now, not as memory, not as regret, but as variable. "They were worth saving," he said. "You weren't involved." "That's the point," she said. "You didn't need me." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." The admission was clean, surgical. She exhaled slowly. "You're punishing Marcus," she said, "but you're judging me." "Yes." No hesitation. "You're using him," she continued, "to show me what I traded." He folded his arms. "I'm showing you," he corrected, "what you chose." Her jaw tightened. "I chose survival." "You chose approval," he said, voice sharpening for the first time. "You chose legacy over truth and called it responsibility. You don't get to rewrite." "I don't," he interrupted. "I audited it." The word cut deeper than any accusation. "I read the ledgers," he continued. "Not financial, moral, every justification, every silence, every moment you told yourself there was no other way." She met his gaze, unflinching. "There wasn't," she said. "There was," he replied. "You just didn't like the cost." Silence fell again, denser now. Ilara broke it. "You're not doing this for justice." "No," he said. "You're doing it to prove that love was a liability." He considered that. "Love became a liability," he said at last, "the moment it required silence to survive." Her voice lowered. "So what now? You keep Marcus alive. You let him rot. You rebuild what I abandoned. And I watch?" "Yes." "For how long?" He stepped closer now, closing the distance she had crossed earlier. "As long as it takes for you to stop pretending you were powerless." Her eyes burned, but no tears came. "And when I do?" she asked. Liam looked at her, not cruelly, not kindly. "Then you'll finally understand," he said, "that this was never about revenge." "Then what was it about?" He paused. "Correction." The word echoed. Ilara straightened. "You've turned yourself into the thing you hated," she said. "You wear power like armor and call it clarity. And you," he countered, "still mistake remorse for innocence." She nodded slowly. "So this is it," she said. "No absolution, no forgiveness." "No," he agreed. "Those are comforts. This is consequence." She turned toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped, not to look back, but to speak. "You're right about one thing," she said. "The cage isn't Marcus's." Liam said nothing. "It's yours too," she finished. She left. The door closed softly behind her. Liam remained where he was, staring at the space she had occupied. For the first time since his return, the city below felt less like a kingdom and more like a weight. The weight of the key. The markets collapsed quietly. There was no dramatic crash, no screaming headlines, just a slow, inexorable unraveling, confidence draining out of the Valerius group like blood from a carefully hidden wound. A delayed shipment here, a regulatory inquiry there, a missed projection, a withdrawn endorsement. Small things, fatal things. Liam watched it all from above. From the glass-walled office at the crown of Phoenix Tower, He observed the numbers scroll across his screens with clinical detachment. He had designed this outcome with the same precision he once used to draft buildings. Load-bearing weaknesses identified, stress points exploited, collapse inevitable, but contained. Marcus Valerius still sat at the head of his table, still gave interviews, still smiled for photographs, still signed documents with a gold pen he no longer owned. But his hands shook now. Always. The final error came on a Thursday. Marcus tried to move money without approval. It wasn't much. A minor transfer routed through an old subsidiary, an instinctive reflex from the man he used to be. A test. A rebellion so small, he might have convinced himself it didn't count. The alert reached Liam within seconds. He didn't react immediately. He stared at the notification for a long time, feeling nothing. No anger, no triumph. Just inevitability. Then he made the call. By Friday morning, the audit was public. By noon, the board convened without Marcus. By evening, the press had its headline: Valerius CEO steps down amid governance breach. Marcus was not arrested. He was not ruined. He was erased. The estate was sold quietly. The invitations stopped coming. The name lingered only in footnotes and lawsuits. When Ilara read the news, she closed the paper and said nothing. She moved out of the penthouse 3 days later. Not dramatically. No confrontation. No farewell. She took a small flat near the river, close enough to hear the water at night. She declined interviews, declined offers, declined sympathy. She took a position on the board of the mills, not as owner, not as heir, as oversight. The work was unglamorous, necessary, real. For the first time in years, the legacy no longer felt like a cage. Liam resigned from Phoenix 6 months later. No announcement, no explanation. The board protested. The market speculated. The analysts panicked. He ignored them. On his last day, he stood alone in the office that had once felt like victory and now felt like confinement. The city below moved on, indifferent as ever. He opened the drawer of his desk. Inside lay the key. Not metaphorical, literal. A small brass key from the Blackwood Conservatory, worn smooth with age. He had kept it all these years without knowing why. Proof, perhaps, that something had once been unlocked willingly. He turned it over in his palm. Power had given him control. Truth had given him clarity. Neither had given him peace. He placed the key on the desk and walked away. Years later, the story was told differently. Some said Liam Thorne was a genius investor who dismantled an empire and vanished. Others said he was a cautionary tale, proof that vengeance, perfectly executed, still corrodes the hand that wields it. No one spoke of Ilara Blackwood, which was exactly how she wanted it. On quiet mornings, she walked past the mills and watched people go to work. Real work, imperfect work. The machinery hummed. The systems held. One afternoon, she received a letter. No return address, one line, typed. The cage was never the gold. It was the fear of leaving it. She folded the paper once, then burned it. The world kept turning. Empires rose, empires fell. And somewhere between control and consequence, two people learned the same truth from opposite sides of power. Some victories do not set you free. They only prove you are strong enough to survive the cost.